There's a joke that says Americans plan on fighting the record high temperatures of the past 5 years by switching from Fahrenheit to Celsius. Only it was so easy. In the real world, as we enter the second week of COP27, the International Climate Summit happening in Egypt, the latest science says it is now too late to stop irreversible climate breakdown. We can no longer reduce carbon emissions fast enough, and the reality is we're still on track to increase carbon emissions in the next 10 years. We passed the safe zone 30 years ago. And so we are living into what is not just a crisis, but a catastrophe, a collapse that will be devastating. You've already seen it in Bangladesh, displacing millions, destroying crops and infrastructure, and there's just not the money to repair it. Some will say it's irresponsible to speak this way of speaking about collapse, and indeed scientists have struggled with how honest they should be in their projections because it is so pessimistic and despairing. But denying reality, just switching from Fahrenheit to Celsius and pretending the problem is solved, doesn't help us manage or deal with what's going on. And one of the reasons I became a Unitarian Universalist is because of our adherence to our fifth source, because we root ourselves in heeding the results of science. We try to face reality as it is, to see the oppression we all live within, to be humble in the face of our limitations, to acknowledge and respond to what science shows us. Scientists say the climate crisis is no longer reversible. But there are avenues for hope now as we accept that knowledge. Means we're at the beginning of this great transition, the end of the ordinary rhythms of nature and society, and that's frightening and terrifying. I have taken for granted those shifting seasons, taking comfort from those steadiness of the seasons of nature. But now it's 20 degrees Celsius in November and there are heat waves in April, and it's hard to sort of know how to live in any moment. And I'd like to ignore how much that really unsettles me. After all, it is standard human operating instructions to avoid pain and discomfort. Nobody likes it. But I hurt myself by living in denial. Acknowledging, naming, and speaking our fears, our despair, our angers at leaders, our grief, it really does help. By accepting and managing our emotions, we can prevent paralysis of the spirit. Sometimes just naming them can help. Just sitting and being aware of all the feelings moving through us, writing them down, sharing them with a friend, and they sit a little less heavy. Taking time to do meditations as the one Susan offered us today. And it's not easy. I know I come from a generation that was trained in keeping my feelings to myself, to shove them deep on down and stay polite at all costs. And yet we are the earth, upright and proud, and us the earth is knowing. And we know, the earth knows there is something deeply wrong. I know that I feel it, and perhaps some of you do too, deep down in my spirit. And as people of the chalice, we accept that we are part of the interdependent web of life, and that web is suffering. It hurts, and if we love the earth, we feel it's suffering too. And we can't deny our emotions if we want to find the energy and motivation to respond. So sitting with them, even when they're overwhelming, helps. As does connecting with nature, getting out there and reminding ourselves of how wonderful it is. Simply being for a moment, or developing a relationship with a particular place or creature. Because when we take time to be in nature, we begin to see those intricate synergies of the living earth. How the birds respond to the wind, how the pond water ripples as the fish move, how all of that living, breathing life moves together and we're part of it. That joy of connection is so invigorating and sustaining. It can balance that suffering. A couple of weekends ago, in that beautiful, strangely warm time, Mark and I went up to Meadowvale Park, and the salmon were there in the creek. They were streaming upstream, full of life and vigor, catching our attention as they hung in the shallow waters under the willows. And they were beautiful, as were all the people in the park that sunny afternoon. The families biking by, the Sikh couple taking wedding photos in all their finery, the Thai women who were being filmed dancing this traditional dance under the trees. All of us full of life and together on the earth. It's good to be part of the whole. And environmental wellness happens when we know ourselves as belonging to the earth, as part of all of it, the polluted waters and the bright salmon, the dancing and the sorrow, the climate crisis and the healing responses. Being connected, just even looking out at the trees here, helps us stay well. So of course, environmental wellness is difficult with an earth in crisis. This aspect of wellness is going to be an ongoing challenge. And we might have to engage in healing, which is a term that's been coined by researchers for slow, ongoing individual and collective efforts to recover from disaster. Healing, slow healing, emphasizes that it's a gradual process, it's complex and nonlinear. And anyone who's lost a loved one recognizes that value, that healing that comes and goes, the grief that comes and goes, that we need to sometimes just sit, stay with the ruins and come to terms with the loss. Moving on quickly is not necessarily a sign of health, because it takes time to face and accept our fears and anxieties and not just sweep them away, because then they just keep rising again and again. So naming our emotions empowers us and honors the struggle, honors that reality of the crisis we're living in. And I see healing or slow healing is like wearing a cast while our arm mends. It helps us stay engaged and active, and it protects our tender hearts. It helps us act for change even as we process all that we've lost. And so we manage that grief and anger and sorrow that we feel when faced with the reality of the climate crisis by acknowledging our feelings, growing our sense of joyful connection with the earth, and accepting that healing takes time, that it's a process. We are part of the interdependent web of life on earth, and the earth's suffering is our suffering. So let us not turn away. Once we've adjusted ourselves to this new reality, we can see the possibilities that are there. As Susie Orbach, a member of the Extinction Rebellion movement, says, and really any labor organizer has said, we need to mourn and organize. It's not one or the other. And there's a grassroots group led by academic Jim Bendell, who's created the Deep Adaptation Forum. And the forum is there to bring people together to talk about ways to frame the climate crisis that offer focus on substantive, meaningful change. And Bendell has suggested 4 concepts, the 4 R's, to guide conversations and actions as we learn this new adaptation to a new world. And the first is resilience, discerning which values we wish to retain and cultivate as we go forward. And this is the intentional cultivation of ways of being. And as a spiritual community, we are well practiced at this. We seek to be welcoming, to start from trust, to put people first. We're learning resilience in all of our everyday actions. The second is relinquishment, letting go of what is no longer working, what no longer helps us. And this is a hard one, to let go of those beloved norms. It might mean on a society level, no more building on floodplains, to eating less meat. The third is restoration, recovering ways of being that have been left behind by corporate consumer capitalism. It involves moving from a growth economy towards a circular one. So it might include things like losing water-hungry lawns, rewilding landscapes, returning to a seasonal local diet. And finally, the fourth is reconciliation. The invitation to reconcile with each other so that we avoid creating more harm as we need to work together to face the climate crisis. And this, as we know, is working to end oppressions wherever we may find them and to build more inclusive systems. The Deep Adaptation Forum says that these four concepts are the starting place for healing a climate crisis world. They're guides to environmental wellness. Resilience, relinquishment, restoration, and reconciliation. As I've said, as a Child's community, we practice this kind of resilience because we continually reflect on the values that matter to us and what values keep us grounded. And as change happens within our own community, we're learning the art of relinquishment, finding out what traditions we can set aside and what we can let go of so that we can move forward and be open to what's next. And given that many of our UU values challenge the norms of everyday society, I believe we're already learning the art of restoration, that power of going slower and nurturing community. And our eighth principle is our way of practicing reconciliation. It calls us to empower those who are denied their power by systems of oppression. Resilience, relinquishment, restoration, and reconciliation. These are the ways to live well. And I think they offer ways for us to live well even if we weren't living in a climate crisis. And that gives me hope. Because it tells me how we seek to be as people of the chalice is a good and healthy healing way to live. We work for environmental wellness. And we're still learning because the new old ways of being aren't the norm. We're still figuring out it's all a process, it's open-ended. But if we practice making decisions based on those 4 R's, we will continue to create a nurturing community and act for an equitable, sustainable world. The climate crisis is not the end of life on this planet. It's not the end of humankind, but it is an era of destruction, and it's going to be the end of how we are used to living. Our children and our grandchildren and our great-children are going to be living into a very different world. So this is a time of transition, a turning of the wheel that will bring us into new ways of being. And after the service today, as Susan mentioned, I'm going to invite you into a sharing space at a table with our lunch to talk about our feelings and experiences of the climate crisis. The first step is to acknowledge not just the problem, but our grief and sorrow and all our feelings about all that we are losing. And as we engage with our sorrow, we'll remember our love and connection, that we belong to the earth, that we are the earth. May we bring forth this day new wisdom and courage to create a world not of wealth, but of well-being, a world of peace and abundance for all. May it be so, so say we all.